Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Cates. Thank you for waiting patiently for a few minutes in the waiting room while we got started. So on behalf of AIA Tennessee, NOMAnash and NOMA Memphis, I want to welcome you to J+EDI Talk number 3, The Promise of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Architecture. I want to cover a few housekeeping notes before introducing today's leader and moderator. First, this session is being recorded for future distribution. So please try to keep your microphones on mute in order to keep the background noise to a minimum. If you have questions for Ingrid or the panelists, please feel free to type them in the chat box. Also, if you have comments, please feel free to type those in the chat box. And then lastly, AIA Tennessee will report your CE to national, so please type your name and member number to capture your attendance. If you'd like a certificate of attendance, you could also include that request as well, and we'll get that to you. So now that that's out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our leader and moderator for J+EDI Talk number 3, Ms. Ingrid Cockren. Most of you might already be familiar with Ingrid from the past 2 talks. However, if you're joining us right now, I want to share a little bit of Ingrid's background with you. Ingrid's a Clarksville native and currently resides in Nashville. She graduated from University of Tennessee. She graduated from Tennessee State University with a BS in psychology and from Vanderbilt University's Peabody College with a master's in education and child studies. Ingrid specializes in co-creating equitable, inclusive environments within organizations, collective impacts, and grassroots movements. Utilizing her knowledge of stress, trauma, human development, and personality, Ingrid has been able to translate research concerning diversity, equity, inclusion, and trauma-informed practices into workplace and organizational solutions that suit both traditional and virtual teams. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this program over to Ingrid.
Thank you, Ashley, and I hope everyone can hear me. So today we're going to talk about the promise of diversity, equity, and inclusion in architecture. In our last 2 sessions, we really just outlined what is racism and institutional racism. And then we talked about the current disparities in the demographics of architecture. And then today we will talk about what are the solutions and what can we look to in the future. So I want to do just a bit of a review and also talk about what real change would look like when it comes to addressing racism in the field or any type of diversity and inclusion issue. So first, I always like to give a working definition of racism. So the belief that a race is fundamentally determinant of their characteristics and capacity, and that it's about superiority of one race over another. Also, the belief that when it comes to institutional racism, that there's a systemic oppression of a racial group, basically for social, economic, and political gain. In addition, I want to go over a few key terms. So in our first session, we really talked about critical race theory. And I want to review that very quickly. So critical race theory is a body of research that came out of the field of psychology and has really impacted education, law, and plenty of other industries. But the main tenets of this body of research is first that white supremacy is deeply embedded within American society and that it is permanent within our society. Also that racism is institutional, not individual. Like I said in the first session, I don't agree with this tenet. I think it's both. But for the purposes of today's session, we want to look at what that institutional racism looks like, and systems level oppression is going to be our focus. And then America's power structure was built to marginalize people of color. Often when talking about racism, in our society, we tend to think of it as issues that are impacting certain communities kind of just because, or we don't know how it has happened. But critical race theory is really clear in that the power structures that are present in this country were built to marginalize people of color on purpose, explicitly, and that is still impacting us today. And then, of course, lastly, race is a social construct. a tool to stratify power. And so with that understanding that there is no real genetic component of race, it is more so a category of, or the system of categorizing people by skin color that was essentially started in the 1700s in Europe, where white men in Europe who were the intellectual elites classified people based on race and gave them attributes based on race, and at that time deemed Black and brown people specifically as deficient or less evolved than white and Asian people. And this is the classification that happened obviously during a time where the social political context was of colonization, white superiority. And so this system of classification of people that was done in the 1700s is still impacting how we view each other today. Again, there is no real genetic basis for racism or for the classification of race. So with that understanding, what we know today, the science tells us that any disparity that we have along racial lines around criminality or low educational attainment, these are not issues of genetics or culture. These are issues of the hostile environment that is created by racism. And so we want to look at what equity would look like. Equity is a buzzword at this point, and sometimes people don't really know what it means. So when we think about equity, it is not the same as equality. Equality is kind of what we have today. Not all the way, but that's what we're attempting. We're saying that everyone has equal rights. However, because of the past, because of hundreds of years of exploitation and oppression of people of color, what is needed is equity. And so equity is really about giving people what they need. Equality is about everyone having the same. Equity is about making past wrongs right, giving everyone a fair shot to succeed. And this does not always look like equality. Actually, if we are pushing for equity, that means certain groups that need more will get more. They'll get more attention, more effort. It will not be equal. And then, of course, ecology matters. In the first session, I really outlined that racism is a system in our country. And so all approaches to addressing racism must also be systematic. In the first session, I really talked about Yuri Bronfenbrenner, who is a Russian child psychologist. And he created a model that really talked about child development. However, this model can be used to address any type of social issue. And so if we look at race and racism as a social construct, then that means that we can address it within the model that he proposed. And what he said is that we have the different systems that are impacting people. And so if we use racism, when we look at this model, we would say that racism is reflected in our larger society's atmosphere, right? The environment around us reflects racism, but then also our beliefs and ideology and the culture that we have is also reflecting racism. Our beliefs about people of color, our beliefs about white people, how we raise our children based on these beliefs and attitudes that we hold. And then we have systems that are more about policies and procedures and how do they reflect racism? How do our neighborhoods reflect racism? And so all of these different systems are at play. And if we want to address racism within an industry, we have to be systematic as well. And so this is what systemic liberation or systemic healing would look like. In this visual, it is is based on Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. This is a more updated version. Bronfenbrenner's model is from the late 60s and was the basis for Head Start, which is an early childhood program that we have here. But the RISE Center in 2015 created a different model that was specifically about addressing trauma through healing and liberation. And so on one side, we have dehumanization and distress and what that looks like. On the individual level, it's going to be adversity that you experience, microaggressions, the way that you raise children, or what we would call that intergenerational transmission. And then atmospheric distress is going to be your neighborhood. Is your neighborhood safe? Do you have safe passage? Are you being overly surveilled by the police? And then, of course, family and community violence. And then at the larger systems level, we have systemic subjugation of people of color. This looks like policies that were put in place specifically to address the issues in people of color's neighborhoods, and also this can be found in the media, so the way that people of color are represented in the media. And then at the highest level, we have nation building. This is where our beliefs and attitudes lie. And in America, we have obviously enslavement and genocide of the indigenous people. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, so I just want to take some time to reflect on that. Colonization, a history of colonization, economic exploitation of free or cheap labor, displacement, cultural hegemony, which really is talking about how there is one way to view the world. And in America, we view the world through the eyes of a white man. And when we do this, then we discount the experiences of others. And then, of course, white supremacy. So as we look to how we can heal these processes of dehumanization and distress, we have to look on the liberation and healing side. And I want to take some time here because this is where the solutions lie for your industry. We'll start at the individual level. So honor, resilience, and fortitude. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have panelists here that are going to share their experience. And so we're going to honor their resilience and fortitude and listen and validate them today. This looks like processing. What are those personal traumas? This is supporting healing and loving connections, and also tailoring supports and opportunities, which is really what we're talking about today. What does it look like to provide equity within your field, especially for those who are newcomers? Next, we have build beloved community. And this is when we get into the more of your work. So build beloved community is about creating healing spaces. It's about arts and expression. It is about base and power building. So herein lies, neighborhoods, community centers, also radical inquiry, which is what we're doing today. We're looking at how systems work and how we're impacted by systems. Celebration and affirmation. We talked about this section in our last, our second session that was dedicated to the state of diversity, equity, inclusion in architecture. So is all of your work a European aesthetic? Do you take into account what the neighborhoods are like for the buildings that you build and the work that you do? Does it reflect the community, or does it reflect your own aesthetic, or does it reflect the European aesthetic? Are you creating healing spaces? We talked about trauma-informed design. So creating healing spaces in neighborhoods or in spaces that are most likely impacted by trauma. Obviously, arts and expression are healing. So allowing students of color and children of color to understand your field and be interested in your field so that they can heal themselves through art and expression. Base and power building. So that's going to look like you sitting on a board and being an advocate for communities of color. And that is going to be a really good place to talk about the next level with Lead with Love and Justice. So we talked before about sitting on boards, being an advocate, using your position in society as a way to advocate for others and to power share. And we talked about, you know, some work around volunteering, and what does that really mean? And sometimes we think that we know how to help a community, and we try to work for that community when you should be working with that community. And so there is nothing about us without us. How are you including people of color in decision making, especially in ways that impacts their community? This is also where addressing issues like gentrification lies, in these policy level spaces where you can be an advocate. And then we have the last level, which is collective liberation. So truth and reconciliation, telling the truth about even the history of AIA, telling the truth about what it was like for those very first architects of color as they broke into the field after you know, during Reconstruction. And then creating multiracial solidarity, creating committees and commissions dedicated to really addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Reparations, when it comes to reparations for an industry, it's going to look like putting aside resources and money to sponsor, to give scholarships, to mentor. And this is going to be a way for you to pay reparations and provide equity for communities of color within your field. So I want to take some time as we reflect on this to take any questions that may come up before we move into our panel, especially questions about what individuals can do as it pertains to addressing and healing within your profession. And so Ashley, if there's anything in the chat or if anyone has a question, let me know.
Not yet. It looks like a lot of people are just including their names and numbers. So okay. For those that didn't join yet, as a reminder, you can put questions and comments in the chat box and we'll get to them.
So this concludes the portion of this series where I have, you know, been giving information and this hopefully helpful framework for how you can move forward in your work. I want to give a disclaimer that this is not a one-off type of situation, that this is introductory. And that there's so much more about diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to application and things of that nature. So if you have any questions for me, or here's my contact information, and now we're going to move into our panel. And so our panelists today are Valerie Franklin, Colby Mitchell, and Cameron Davis. So I want to take some time to introduce our panelists and tell all the great things that they've done. So first we have Valarie Franklin, who is an architect and senior associate at Moody Nolan, the largest Black-owned architecture firm in the nation. She is an energetic architect, author, educator, advocate, and servant leader who is fiercely committed to forging equitable paths for young professionals. She combines insight, empathy, and creativity in making impactful contributions to her industry and community. She founded and launched the Nashville chapter of National Organization for Minority Architects in 2017, and she is one of only 7 Black women in the state of Tennessee who is a registered professional architect. She's president of Tennessee's Architect Political Action Committee. She also serves in Nashville by actively supporting the United Way, St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and serving on Metro's Development and Housing Agency's Design Review Board. She is on the board of directors for Civic Design Center. She is deeply attuned to the political, social, and cultural pulse of Nashville and works to find the time to make impactful contributions to our industry and community while being an integral team member at Moody Nolan. And she's also a dedicated mother to daughters. Next, we have Colby Mitchell. He is a 2013 graduate of the University of Memphis. He has his master's in architecture. He's a project manager for Self Tucker Architects, a Black-owned mid-sized architectural firm in Memphis, Tennessee, who recently celebrated 25 years in business. He's been with Self Tucker for 6 years. He also serves as the vice president for NOMA Memphis and sits on the board of directors for Memphis Hermitage Incorporated and Leadership Preparatory Charter School, where his son attends. And Self Tucker recently completed design of their brand new $5 million middle school. And then we have Cameron Davis. She is a 5th year BArch student at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And she's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. She's interested in pursuing full-time work as an architect beginning in May of 2021. She is curious and inquisitive, and she has helped her find a new and interesting way to solve problems. This has also led to her being a recipient of the AIA Middle Tennessee and Brewer Ingram Fuller Award. She has had experience in school and out of school and 2 previous internships in Chattanooga and Birmingham. So I would like to thank our panelists for coming today. I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. I'm also asking everyone to turn their cameras on so that we can see your faces and we can be interactive with you. And then we're going to get into our first question. So the question is, what was your inspiration for entering this profession? And Colby, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you all for the opportunity to serve on this panel today. My introduction into architecture was actually from my mother, who's a retired art teacher. I'm from a small town in Arkansas, Marianna, Arkansas, population about 4,000. And so you can imagine just how little exposure someone like myself may have to the profession. And so it happened about going into 9th grade, actually, when, of course, you're just getting into high school and you're outside of your core curriculum, you're now able to select your electives. And so, you know, I'm a guy, so, you know, guys, you know, they work with their hands, so I was going to go into carpentry. And so my mother had suggested, why don't you try drafting? Because, again, you know, she's a retired art teacher, and I drew and did all those things growing up. And so she said, why don't you try drafting and design? I had no idea what drafting and design was at that point in life. So 9th grade was really my introduction into architecture. And, you know, for most of us, we see buildings and we see them built and we always around them, but, you know, many of us never ask, you know, I wonder who designed these spaces that we live in, that we work in, that we sleep in, that we get healthcare from, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my introduction into architecture. I did it, took those courses all throughout high school and won a competition my senior year in high school. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this full time. So that was my introduction into the field.
Thank you. Thank you, Colby. Next, Cameron, I want to ask you the same question, especially with there being so few women of color in the field. What was your inspiration for entering into this profession?
So first off, I'm going to say I apologize. There's roofers at my house right now. So if that gets too loud, just let me know and I can see if I can like put on headphones or something. But so for me, I originally hadn't even chosen architecture when I entered college. I was actually going to do anthropology, which is something I've always been interested in. And it was my freshman year of school that I learned about architecture. I've always been interested in design and things like that. And so I think once I got into architecture and I started to understand what it was, I understood how important it was for future generations to see like an architect that looked like me, to see even like another Black girl in a PWI, especially like in school. And so I think that's really what's been driving me to like pursue architecture and what has made me love this profession.
Thank you, Cameron. And can you let everyone know what a PWI is? I always like to explain acronyms.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, a PWI is a predominantly white institution.
And now, Valerie, share with us your inspiration for entering this profession.
Hello, everyone. It's a loaded question. That one is. So my introduction was not as clear as Colby and Cameron's. Was kind of reflected Cameron's. I did not know about architecture when I went into college, but I do have recollections of architecture, like when I started noticing architecture. My parents, my mom is from originally from Chicago, and my dad is from Nashville. So when I was growing up, we would go to Chicago to visit my grandparents, and my grandfather actually lived in Cabrini Green, the housing development in Chicago. And so I remember going there, and I remember how the architecture made me feel. And so that was my first experience, just kind of noticing architecture. I noticed it was just a lot of concrete. It was a lot of crowding. It was a lot of fences. I remember how it made me feel, just, afraid, and different things like that. And so I think from that point, and I was very young at that point. So from that point on, it was just, I just found myself building stuff. Like I would build these houses out of cards. I would use like decks of cards. I know you guys probably done that before, or Legos or anything like that. And look through books, architectural magazines, and even like the home layouts and different things like that. And I started to draw. I started to draw things, and I was actually pretty good at it. But in school, that it wasn't really fostered. I was good at math too, and I even ended up in high school. I took some shop classes and different things like that, but nobody ever talked to me about going into a field of architecture. So I didn't have that mentorship there from my teachers. I did, and then I had, some lack of role models within my family as well, because I was the first person in my family, not in my house, but in my entire family to go to college, to even, talk about going to college. And it was quite a shock to my parents, because they were like, ooh, we got to pay for college. How are you going to do that? So even, just going to college and thinking about college, grasping for those role models, I gravitated towards, what Ingrid's been talking about, role models in the entertainment industry and things like that. So my favorite show was The Cosby Show, at the time. And Felicia Rashad played Claire Huxtable, and she was a lawyer, and she had, a husband and a family, and, and it was what I aspired to be professionally, just to be a professional. So I went to college majoring in political science, thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer, even though, I demonstrated traits, towards architecture. So when I got to college, I was in political science, for a year. I befriended some students in the architecture program. And I went into the studio, and I was just like amazed, at the projects that they had on the walls, the little the models that they were building and things like that. And I was like, what am I doing? You know, I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, and it was and I would say that it was by accident because, you know, in Alabama, you know, I'm from Nashville, but I went to Tuskegee University in Alabama, and Tuskegee and Auburn are the only two that are licensed, you know, that are accredited programs of architecture. So it was just by coincidence that I went to Tuskegee. And then once I saw their projects, and then they had already seen some talent in me, I started helping them with their projects and everything while I was, you know, majoring in political science. I'm working on their models, putting little trees and stuff on it. And so that next semester, I changed my major to architecture. So pretty long story, but that's how it happened.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And so, and I want to use this as a point of reflection. So I want everyone to think about how they got into the field. What does that look like for you, and how does it differ from our three panelists? In our second session, we talked about, you know, children of color seeing themselves as architects. How does that even happen? This is a good way to understand the need for pipelines. So often we think about high school as the place, but when we look at how children's minds work, children are very capable of understanding professions very early on. So elementary schools would be a good place to visit so that those children understand that this field exists, that it could be for them, and it could create a pipeline for more people of color to go into the field and to see themselves as future architects. And this is very important for the future of your field, because again, you know, as we move, you know, I think we talked about this in the second session about the age of equity, that this is a turning point in our time, that we are understanding that the past, we have put in a lot of effort to oppress people of color, not just by chance. It didn't just happen, but there was a lot of effort into oppressing people of color for economic exploitation. And as we move into the age of equity, what does it look like to right that wrong? It's going to look like, you know, young children being aware of the profession, pipelines being created, opportunities being created for people who would not normally see themselves as architects, who have absolutely no idea that it's something that they can do or that even exists. And so we have to think about going younger when we look at outreach. Next question is, how has your experience in this profession been impacted by racism, sexism, or elitism? And so I'm going to start with you, Cameron. How has your experience been impacted by racism, sexism, or elitism?
I'm going to start by talking about like elitism, which is probably something I notice most in architecture. Even outside of racism, I notice an exclusion, whether that be, like we just discussed, through just younger children not being exposed to it, and all the way up to high school and college. I wasn't exposed to it, and also I feel like architecture is a elitist major in the sense that it's expensive, and it's also mostly like upper middle class people who get into the profession. So I think that by opening who has visibility to the major, like by looking at who else could we include in this, I think that's the main way I've been impacted. Also just in designing, you look around and you see like a rendering on the side of a building, and something I've noticed is that even the scale figures are something that aren't always as diverse. And I think that's exclusionary in its own right. Think about, you look at a housing complex and you see the people in the drawing and they don't represent you, then how can you feel represented within architecture or within that design? So I think that's the main way that I've seen that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Next, Valerie, what has been your experience in how has it been impacted by racism, sexism, and or elitism?
So looking for the unmute button. Got it. I would say you can look at the questions that I'm being asked now, and as president of NOMA, the NOMA chapter here in Nashville, the questions that I get is, where are the Black architects? And my experiences are directly our background, to that question. And racism and systemic racism, as a matter of fact, has a lot to do with it. And I think that, in joining this panel today, I made a commitment to myself not to say, okay, this happened to me, this happened to me, because people really need something to take away from this conversation. And with that, and looking at that question, where are the Black architects? We have to take some responsibility and understand that it's our collective fault that they're not in the pipeline. And it's largely due to the effects of systemic racism, racism that I've experienced and others on this panel, and just others in my minority and even, gender groups that I'm in. So thinking about, things that I've experienced, number one, demographics and opportunity, thinking back to when I was a child, the opportunities that I had living in North Nashville during my early childhood years, and not really having great opportunities until I moved out to Mount Juliet, which is the suburbs, of most of you guys know what Mount Juliet is. So in my later years, thinking about education and career, options, it wasn't, if you do the math, and I think I probably have more experience on this panel. I've been in the profession about 24 years. And if you do the math, it wasn't until about just over 50 years ago that we had options in the South to go to places, to shop places, hospitals, education that was equal. And then, even licensure, we're behind the curve on that, so we weren't allowed to be licensed until, the mid 1900s. And so in looking at that whole pipeline, ask yourself the questions, what schools are you looking at when it comes to recruitment? Are you looking at the same schools, or are you going and looking at maybe some historically Black institutions, which is where, we had to create our own schools because we weren't allowed to go to the other ones. So look there. And then when it comes to one thing that struck me when Ingrid was talking about allostatic load is just the realism of it, and the realism of that when it comes to attrition of Black people. So I'm speaking for myself, Black women in profession. When racism is always is on the cusp somewhere, and then you have the double whammy of sexism on top of that. You look at how much the pay grade. Women are already paid 80%, 80 cents on the dollar. Black women are paid 63 cents on that dollar. So what makes it attractive to be in this profession, as a Black woman? What is it? So to answer the question, things that I've experienced, some examples. I could give you many examples starting from, when I was a child on the way walking to school, having bullies calling me the N-word, on the way to elementary school, and just not feeling safe just on my walk to school. Entering the profession and my boss walking into my boss saying that losing this job would be worse than my daughter running off with a black guy. You know, and walking in and hearing that, and then, you know, dealing with the rest of my time at that job with him trying to prove to me that he wasn't a bigot. Going into a gallery, you know, being invited to a gallery. This was a Women in Architecture event, and I get to the door, and they're like, "This is an event for architects, you know, it's closed." You know, and I'm like, okay, I just saw a woman architect come in and nobody asked her question. You just, you know, you just let her sign in. But me, you know, I get turned around like I'm not supposed to be there. Even my boss, you know, working and my boss, seeing my boss in the reflection of my monitor, you know, making fun of my hair. You know, I have, you know, even going to and this events like Architects Day on the Hill, you know, and an AIA event, and walking into that room and someone coming up to me saying, "Oh, it's two of you here." So it's, and then, you know, just dealing with microaggressions, you know, many microaggressions in the workplace. But it's not, sadly to say, you know, it's not unique to me. And if you look at things that have happened recently, especially with Leslie Loco at the New York School, you know, Spritzer School of Architecture. And I would just like to read a quote from her, asking her why she, when Architectural Record asked her why she resigned after just 1 year of being in that position as Dean of School of Architecture. Now, note, Leslie Loco, she's a Black woman, but she's from Africa. This is her first time, you know, she was, the school is in New York and it's in the United States. So I want to read her quote. "Race is never far from the surface of any situation in the US. Having come directly from South Africa, I wasn't prepared for the way it manifests in the US, and quite simply, I lack the tools to both process and deflect it. The lack of respect and empathy for Black people, especially Black women, caught me off guard. Although it's by no means unique to Spritzer, I suppose I'd say in the end, my resignation was a profound act of self-preservation." So with that, I just want to, you know, just say that the allostatic load, you know, it's real, you know, it's something real. And we have to, you know, we have to reimagine architecture and reimagine this pipeline and build it to what we want to be. You know, just take a look at your organizations and make sure that they reflect who you want to be, because if they don't, you know, it's been by design that it's that way. So you have to intentionally go in and redesign it. Because, you know, having that diversity within your firm, it not only opens up opportunities for more diversity to come in, it also quells, you know, racism that may be inside the office, because you get more exposure to different cultures and people start to understand instead of create judgments. And then, you know, it's just good overall to have that diversity and start to learn what the benefits of diversity are within your organization. I'm gonna stop talking now. I can keep going, but stop me, Ingrid.
Thank you, Valerie. I don't believe in, we're listening and validating today, so I don't believe in stopping people. But Colby, tell us, you know, what has been your experience and how has it been impacted by racism, sexism, or elitism?
So thankfully, I haven't had too many overt situations, but definitely, like Valerie said, there are a lot of microaggressions around, and you know, a lot of covert instances. So I'll give a couple examples. One, I remember going to a contractor, owner, architect meeting in 2016. So this was around the same time that Colin Kaepernick was getting blackballed in the NFL, and the kneeling protests had started. And so I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. And so I went into that meeting, and I saw one of the participants of the meeting had a Dallas Cowboys lanyard around his neck. And so I remember it was a Monday, so the previous day we had played and we had won the game, and like many Cowboys do, fans will greet each other with a "How about them Cowboys?" And so excited that we won, I'm thinking that, you know, he would share that same sentiment. And so surprisingly, he was like, yeah, but the game is just not entertaining to me anymore. It's just not entertaining. He said, well, I mean, I wish they would just get out there and do their job. And so I was taken aback by that. And I said, so I responded to him. I said, so you mean to tell me that football is no longer entertaining? It's lost its excitement because of us standing up for, you know, who we are. Quarters 1 through 4, you know, are still entertaining, right? But what outside of happens before the first quarter and the fourth quarter when the game is over, what happens to us as Black people and what happens in our lives matter. And so, you know, we can't always be your form of entertainment and to, you know, bring pleasure to your life. What are we getting out of this as well, right? And so, you know, whether it's football or whether it's architecture or anything else, whatever profession you might be in, you know, we need that equity out of it as well. And so, you know, that was an interesting situation, but I definitely spoke up for us on that one. And another one that actually happened within our office, of course, I work for a Black-owned architecture firm, and of course, we do have some Caucasian employees. And so one day, this was like my first year working for the firm that I'm with now, and this individual is no longer with our firm, by the way, but I had a long weekend, and I was talking to one of our principals, who is one of our Black principals, and the Caucasian team member on our team had noticed that I had a long weekend with projects and different things, and he said, "Oh man, you're a busy boy." And so, you know, thankfully my principal immediately stepped in and said, "No, he's not a boy, he's a man, and that's how he should be addressed." And so, you know, it's those microaggressions and things like that go a long way, and it's history of that causes others to, you know, look at us as less than and not equal to, and so we just have to be vocal about those things, as we're doing now. So I'm thankful for what we're doing now, and we need to continue to do these types of things.
Thank you. Thank all the panelists for sharing. And as we reflect on what those incidents were, the way that people feel other or different, or the microaggressions, and the allostatic load of it. So we talked about allostatic load in the first session. So Valerie brought it up, and so I want to make sure that we are all on the same page on what that means. It is basically the stress of racism. So when we talked about the first session, I started off with a study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study that, for me, is the reason why I'm in this field, even though my background is child development, which seems very different from what we're talking about today. But one of the issues with trauma is that when you're experiencing pervasive ongoing issues, pervasive ongoing adversity, then you will have what is called allostatic load, which is a low-level stress that is there all the time. And so it's kind of thinking about going through your day with an extra layer of stress that has absolutely nothing to do with the work that you're doing or the traffic that you're sitting in or anything like that. One of the ways that I've been able to help my clients, my white clients, understand what that is now that we are in a pandemic, right? Everyone is feeling allostatic load, right? You have your regular day, and then you have this kind of low-level background noise of we're in a pandemic, we're in a pandemic, we're in a pandemic. And this is something that's making you maybe a little bit more tired, a little harder for you to concentrate, a little bit more on edge, quicker to get into an argument, all the different ways that low-level stress impacts you. So this is what Black people and brown people feel on a regular basis when they're not in a pandemic. It's this underlying background noise of I'm different, I'm other, people are racist, people are looking at me differently or expecting different things from me because of my skin color, and it can also be because of gender as well. So it's just, it's draining.
Me about it, you know, and I've been doing a little bit more research on it since you brought it up, is the effects of it on you physiologically, on your physical being, on your health. So can you speak to that a little bit, Ingrid?
Sure. So
when it comes to Black people having a lot of underlying conditions.
Mm-hmm. So when we had the first session and we talked about the study, it really connected how the stress of adversity makes you more likely to have chronic stress-related diseases like diabetes, like high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer. All of these are stress-related diseases. And so these chronic stress-related diseases are more likely to occur in people of color, specifically Black people and Indigenous people. And so this is not by chance. And this is interesting because some of my other clients are hospitals. I'm a consultant for Vanderbilt Medical Center. I'm a consultant in Indiana and Friends Tasking Health. And so what I do is I help them to understand that we believe as a country, even outside of medicine, we believe that certain groups have what we call genetic predisposition. But the science is showing us that this is not actually the case, that racism is creating a hostile environment that is creating sickness and illness in others based on that hostile environment. So it's not that Black people are more likely to get diabetes or have high blood pressure. It's that the environment that they are in is stressful, and it has changed their epigenetics, not so much their genetics, but their epigenetics, which makes them more likely to have these chronic ongoing diseases, in addition to the fact that even if they didn't have any epigenetic changes, the environment that they're in around microaggressions and experiencing overt and covert racism can make it so that they're more likely to have these stress-related diseases. And even if it doesn't get to the point of a disease, it makes it more likely for them to have issues like stomach problems, headaches, all the different things that are associated with stress that is ongoing. Obviously, this does not just impact Black people. This is impacting everyone who's dealing with ongoing adversity. However, racism is a system. So if you are experiencing racism, odds are you're more likely to experience poverty because of discrimination. Odds are you're more likely to be in a dangerous neighborhood because of redlining. Odds are you're more likely to have family issues because of slavery and the dysfunction that has been embedded in parenting practices from slavery. And so it's a complex issue, but it impacts more people than others. This is something that's also reflecting in people of all races that have experienced generational poverty. And so these are the systematic issues that create allostatic load that then make them more likely to get sick. And right now this is reflecting in African Americans and Indigenous people having the lowest lifespan, especially African American men at just 70 years. And so this is a very complex issue that has real implications for people. The stress of racism is killing people. It is shortening the lifespan. And this is kind of a good point to come back to that trauma-informed design. Even creating a space that's healing within neighborhoods that experience high levels of stress and trauma is beneficial to them. Giving children who are living in these stressful dynamics an expressive outlet, the ability to use art to heal themselves, is going to be adding, years to their life. And then, of course, being able to help people to get out of poverty is also going to add years to their life. So it's more than just, something to do or to make rights from the past better. It's more about healing people because you're healing their trauma and alleviating their stress and addressing the adversity that they are experiencing in their environment. Let's go to the next question. I had a question about otherness, but I think that you guys really touched on that. With the exception of Cameron, I want to give her an opportunity. So Cameron, have you experienced a time where you had a distinct incident where you experienced otherness or exclusion?
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on that. And I was going to get to it in the other question because you said a lot about allostatic load just now. And I think that is a big part of the otherness that I often feel when I'm at school. It's like the idea of walking into a room and having to count how many other people are in the room that look like you. It's having to think about the architecture that you're making and making sure that it represents everyone that you want to represent, and also just the idea of fitting the project to like your mold. So for me, I always want to see myself represented, and I always feel some sort of pressure to make my projects feel more diverse. And I don't always know where this pressure is coming from, but it's something that I've been like noticing increasingly as I've gone through school. I feel like I feel that when I ask other people about this, like sometimes I try to think like, am I the only one feeling this way? And I've had replies, like going back to the scale figure thing, I've had replies of people saying, well, why does it matter? It's just a drawing, or like the community is for anyone. So just like, I should just leave it how it is, and I feel like it's in these situations that I've really experienced this lack of inclusion. Also just in there being not that many faculty of color present, and just everyday representation throughout my courses. I feel like I've had to do outside research, and I feel like work harder to be represented in the work that I'm seeing, as opposed to other students who can just like take it at face value and still see themselves represented in all of the courses that we go through.
Thank you for sharing. And when we think about otherness and how you experience it and having to adapt to that, it made me think about some research that I was doing. So when I was researching for this discussion, for this series, I did some research into kind of the Black pioneers in architecture, and I came across this man who had a very patriotic name, Paul Revere Williams, and I was looking at research on him, and it really struck me because it said that he learned how to draw his models upside down because the white people at the time, his clients, weren't comfortable sitting next to him. So he learned to draw upside down so they could be across so that his white clients could be more comfortable. And that is just a reflection of all the adaptations that people of color are making to make others comfortable. And they're doing it as a point of survival so that they can be in their field while also serving people who see them as less than, building buildings that you have to come into the back of, that kind of thing. So next question, and this is kind of highlighting what Valerie was talking about before. So how has mentoring impacted your professional experience? either as the mentee or the mentor, or maybe the lack of mentoring. And we'll start with you, Colby.
So working again for, I've expressed this several times on the Zoom, working for a minority-owned architecture firm. That was intentional for me. When I first graduated from school, I applied to a couple of firms, but Self Tucker was the one that I definitely wanted to be at. They weren't hiring at the time, but about a year later, reached back out to me, and I came on board then. But I mean, just the mentorship of knowing that you have some real genuine mentorship, right? Like, it's not disingenuous. It's not happening just because, you know, I'm studying for the ARE and I'm having to get my experience hours and I'm assigned to a mentor and they're doing it just because it's their job. Like, these individuals have more of a vested interest in me to make sure that I level up and I hit that next plateau. And so, you know, actively seeking that level of mentorship through employment was very key for me. And then the act of providing mentorship as well. So our firm, as well as I'm sure a lot of firms, are solicited by schools to come out for career days and things of that nature. And so I've always loved doing that, and have championed that effort in our office. So I love being able to go out and touch students and reach them, you know, from whether they're kindergarten through 12th grade, no matter where it is. I love that, being able to expose them to the career field before, like me, 9th grade, or before Valerie and entering college and not having, you know, full exposure to the career before then. So, you know, mentorship is really key in all of this, and just being willing and able to, you know, wanting to sit down and you know, offer a desk critique to you know, a fellow colleague, or you know, if you go back to your university and visit, and just be willing to reach out and give back and provide that mentorship. That's very key.
Thank you, Colby. And let's go to Valerie, your experience with mentoring or lack thereof.
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but my lack of mentorship when I was growing up, and even in my pipeline to college, has really encouraged me to be a mentor and an advocate 100% of the time. So I'm pretty much an advocate and mentor on 10, like all the time. So, and it starts, especially, you know, when we look at systemic racism, we have to look at our families, you know, especially as Black people, looking inside our families and being mentors in families. So I'm mentored in my children. You know, I have 3 girls. So I'm mentoring them all the time. So because I know they're looking at me to be an example. And I make it a point to expose them to all types of things, some things that I haven't been exposed to. So history is a great teacher, you know, in that. So I expose them to things that people think they you know, shouldn't be exposed to, being Black girls, you know, such as STEM, you know, things. You know, we go to different events and, you know, STEM coding, you know, different things like that. So make sure, you know, number one, that people in my direct charge, you know, within my circle are being mentored. And then I make it a point to mentor whoever I come in contact with. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is. And I make that a point. So if anyone starts talking to me about architecture, how you doing, what do you need to know? This is, you know, just speaking from my experience. And I know, you know, being in NOMA, an advocate for NOMA, we actually do go into the schools in a concentrated effort to go into the schools and get kids into the pipeline, even as early as kindergarten, exposing them to architecture. And then people that I come in contact with at work, you know, you'd be surprised how many people, you know, haven't, you know, I've getting to the point to where now I'm managing, you know, a lot of projects. I've done the design and, you know, project architecting and all that stuff. But, you know, some, you know, people in our firms, you know, they've never seen a B101 contract, you know, so it's, you know, just that type of exposure to people, knowing that all of this hands down, I'm drawing the building, that's not what encompasses architecture. In order to encompass architecture, sometimes you have to look up and you have to look out into our communities. You have to go out there, you have to talk to the people in the communities and see if what you're designing is what they want in their community, or if it's what they need, because they are looking at us as trusted advisors. So in that sense, you know, making yourself available to the community as well. Mentorship is very, very important, and even important in the structure of your firms. As you look at your board of directors, you look at the leaders in your studio, look at your pipeline that you have to the top. Make sure that there are no glass ceilings, and then look at the people and make sure that it is who you want to be. It's by, I said this before, it's by design that it is the way that it is. So you have to come in and redesign it purposely, you know, make a purposeful effort to do that. Because, you know, in order to get there, you know, you look at the board of directors, you got to bring them in from kindergarten somewhere. So you have to reach out to and create those opportunities to mentor as well. Not necessarily waiting for them to come to you, but you can create them. You know, you get a team together and go into a school, you know, and talk to children and expose them to architecture and let them know that this is an attainable career path for them.
Thank you, Valerie. And what about you, Cameron? How has mentoring impacted your professional experience, or has there been a lack of mentoring?
I think for me, I've had the privilege of right now being a mentor and a mentee. I've had a lot of really great mentors, but again, I haven't had any mentors who I feel like were like me. And so that has definitely been a struggle. And where there are a lack of mentors, I have found myself like trying to be that mentor, sort of in the same way that Valerie said. So I've been really involved in the school, just working with, especially first year students who don't know a lot about the school yet. I'm really adamant about being that first face they see. Many of the students, especially students of color, I want them to know there are other people. I've made it all the way through, and like, you always have me as a mentor, as a voice. Like if you ever need anything, also just being involved with NOMAs, that has also really helped me in understanding, one, the wide world of minority architects, and also just in being a mentor, working with the school, working with others in moments, and seeing that there is a need for something like that, and seeing how important that mentorship is, even just as a club to join. Like, it's important to have that voice there.
Thank you. And mentoring is very important in any industry, but also there's different ways to look at it. So it's important that you have a diverse pool of mentors, because you know, white architects, aspiring architects, need to have mentors of color as well. And so because they need to be able to see people of color in that authority, in that space of authority, in that space of teacher, to see them being reflected in a whole way within the profession. So to see them as a source, or see them as a resource, to see them as knowledgeable. So that is also something that is needed, as well as obviously, because of sheer numbers, that white architects are helping aspiring architects of color in a real way. So there's a difference, and it seems like this is something that's kind of echoed in all three of our panelists, that there's a difference between someone mentoring because they have to check off a box, so this is what I'm doing, versus someone who's really invested. And there seems to be a line drawn there around race, that for whatever reasons, which I won't get into, there seems to be a lack of authenticity in those mentor relationships. And the fault line is around race, and the fault line probably is also around gender. So how do we create an environment where people can mentor in a way that's authentic and that they're really invested in the success of their mentees, even when they don't look like them? And so I think that is something that can be worked on through consulting, through education like we're doing now, so that we can bring those unconscious, implicit biases to light so they can then be addressed, so that you can have more authentic and real interactions with others. I have one last question for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to any discussion that may be coming. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but we will open it up to anyone who kind of just wants to jump out there. And so this question that I have is really just, what is your advice for people of color, especially Black and Latino, because that is reflecting in the demographics that those two groups are very, very much underrepresented in architecture. What is your advice for people entering this profession? And we'll start with you, Valerie.
Okay, so advice for entering the profession. I would say, hang in there. Hang in there. I want to say grow some thick skin and anticipate, and I'm just being real. I'm just anticipate some adversity. And when you're able to anticipate it, it doesn't come as a shock to you when it does happen. So hopefully panels like this and classes and courses like this will get us past that, to past the point that where we're, and even me saying that, that's allostatic load. Okay, so that's something that you're holding, like this might happen, so I got to be ready. So you're ready. And so being able to release that, I think that comes with education of everyone around you, your village of people. And in a lot of circles, you know, these people that I'm seeing on the call, you're in my village of people. And I've been seeing some comments by Rachel Gresham over here in the chat box. And it's important to have allies. I just want to tell, and I want to thank you, Rachel. On LinkedIn, I had written an article about the history of healthcare in Black America. And Rachel just said, I'm going to amplify Valerie's voice and retweet this and repost it. And those are the things that we need to get into doing, really just uplifting one another, amplifying voices, especially when it's something being said that people need to hear and that people need to understand. And that's why I appreciate this panel, which is a direct birth of our Listen, Learn, Acknowledge, and Act declaration that we made earlier this year. Because these issues are real, and these issues, they are affecting families of color, for generations and generations. And a lot of times we're at a loss of how to solve it. So it's not gonna be just us, that solves these issues. We need allies to be in the fight with us, so that we can release that allostatic load and not have to carry that around all the time. So being able to tell your story, to answer your question, Ingrid, I'm not trying to be like a politician and not answer your question. To answer your question, Ingrid, I would say to tell your story and not to be afraid to tell your story, because when you do tell your story, it humanizes the issue. Because you could say, hey, this exists, but when you tell somebody a story about how it affected you, they're like, oh, that's really real. Okay, I see now. So being able to, and I would reach out to all of you on the call, just listen. You know, when someone is speaking to you about something that's happening to them or has happened to them, just listen. Sometimes it's just listen, learn, and then once you listen and learn, you're able to acknowledge it, and then you're able to act on it. Create different avenues where you can become an advocate in the cause, and not let this be an issue. I go back and I look at the graphic, Ingrid, that you showed about equality and equity, where it had the different levels, you know, the crates that you could get on to look over the fence. You know, what if the fence was just gone? What if it was no fence at all? And that's, you know, that's what we are working towards, to break down those barriers, so that you don't have to need crates or anything or ladders to look over it. It's just no barriers. So I would say just stay in the fight, and know that you are going to need allies and a village around you to get to the root of the issues. And I think that's what we're doing with this panel.
Thank you, Valerie. And they do have a third visual for that equality versus equity. But there's levels to this. So, if we are still struggling with equity, we are really not ready for liberation, which is what that no fence means. And it really is about, when we talk about white supremacy, people often don't understand what it really means. A good way to think about it is like when Black people were first allowed to vote. And so, yes, they now have equality. They can vote like other people. But then now we're doing poll tests, where you have to take a test so I can see if you can read or write before you can vote. And so these are different ways that, you know, these things manifest. And it makes it hard for everyone, not just Black people. It makes it harder for white people. It's called bureaucracy. Everything is made harder as we're trying to cut out people from being able to be included. And then we just get narrower and narrower in who can be involved. And this is what the manifestation of white supremacy really is. It doesn't just impact Black people, it impacts everybody. It makes it harder for everyone to get things done. And so liberation is that there's no fence, and that we take down the structures that were put in place by white men at the beginning of our you know, the origin of our country, that will then allow people who are poor to live their best lives, to allow women to live their best lives, to allow people who are not straight to live their best lives. And how do we get to that point? Well, that's liberation. That's when the fence is taken away. Colby, what's your advice for people of color entering the field?
So one that is just such a unique profession. It's like none other, right? You know, it's everywhere. And it touches everything. You know, going back to the mentorship and, you know, career days and different things of that nature, you get a lot of, you know, police. You typically see police and nurses and, you know, those types of professions, and firefighters. And then, so those are some of the first careers that young people are introduced to. But, you know, architecture, when I do these career days, I always talk about this notion of everything, everywhere, and then go into the percentage. And so for everything, you know, architecture, as an architect, through one profession, you can touch so many things. So, you know, for example, if a student was getting ready to go into college and they were undecided on a major, I kind of want to do, you know, I kind of want to be a lawyer, but I kind of want to be a professional athlete as well, or whatever. You know, through architecture, you can live in both of those worlds. You know, you can, you know, you may have had a desire to do one thing and another, but, you know, you can work for a client, or, you know, have a project where you're working on that, on a law firm, and you get to be in their world because you're meeting with them and you're, you know, really experiencing all of that. or, you know, if you kind of wanted to lean towards, you know, medicine, you know, working on a clinic or a hospital, you know, you get to be in their world, and, you know, where does, you know, all of how does the room layout work so that everything is efficient for a nurse coming in and giving care to a patient. And so, you know, just laying out those spaces and being in their world for, you know, an extended period of time, you know, just is truly like none other. So you get to touch everything through one career field. And then it's everywhere. I tell them this too, you know, from the time that you're born to the time that you die, you're either in a building, outside of a building, or close to some buildings. If you're stranded on an island, you probably want to get back to some buildings around. So your entire life, you're around the built environment. But, you know, to the last point that I give them, I always ask them, take a guess. If I took a random 100 architects across the United States, how many of those architects would be African-American? And so, you know, the numbers are always much higher than, you know, you would expect. And a couple of times people have guessed like right on the money, you know, the 2-3%. And so they're really shocked by that when I tell them how low those numbers are. And so, you know, the inverse of that, then going back to that second, you know, point that I give them is, you know, if you look and see just how little impact we have on the built environment by not even being exposed to the profession, that we're so few, but going to a point that you made before about, you know, in the beloved community and, you know, this European aesthetic, you know, how little impact we've had on, you know, just sitting in the classroom that you're doing the, you know, the career day in, you know, raise your hand if you like the colors in here, raise your hand if you like the orientation of the windows and the ceiling heights. And, you know, by us not having any hands-on impact in that, you know, we're missing out on what the world around us looks like. So again, these buildings that we're in, around from the time we're born to the time we die, how much impact have we had on that built environment? And when you enter a career field like this, it really changes the trajectory of that. So, you know, just the exposure is the biggest thing for me to, you know, just share those 3 points. I actually want to write a book on that someday. You know, I every time I do career days, I always get this same spiel. But it quickly opens you up to, and again, this is from a person that's in kindergarten. You know, I asked them, you know, who knows what an architect is? You know, not many hands are raised. And I asked, who knows what a construction worker is? And a lot of hands go up. So people know that these buildings are popping up, and they see the people building them, but, you know, who's behind the scenes on saying, okay, this is what, you know, the floor tile color is going to be, or this is where the fenestration is how this building's going to be laid out. You know, how many times do we walk in a building and ask ourselves, I wonder who designed this space that I either love being in or I hate being in. And we all have places like that. I always ask them, like, imagine the place that you love being, and if you could go there right now, you would. And have you ever asked yourself who designed that space? And, you know, and same, the space you hate going to. Have you ever asked yourself, I wonder who designed the space? So just it's a career truly like none other. So that's what I would share, and that's what I always share with minority Black young students, people entering the career field.
Ingrid, can I tell a quick story? Just real quick. It was a career day story with my daughter. So I have 3 daughters. My youngest is the only one that wants to be an architect. That's just because she doesn't know better at this point. So it was a career day at her elementary school. So she dressed up like me. She wore like a little blazer. She had, you know, some little, you know, nice, you know, she had, you know, a business kind of suit on. And then she had like a roll of drawings, and she had a hard hat. So it was like she was going out to, you know, review a project or something like that. I saw her walking up to the school, and one of her teachers was like, and I was hearing this conversation because I was just dropped her off at school, and the teacher was like, oh, you a little construction worker. And she was like, no, I'm an architect. And the teacher was like, oh, okay. So even little things like that, you know, that impacts a child's, you know, psyche. It was like, she knew better because she knew, you know, that she was representing architecture, not, you know, not saying that just construction, you know, but, you know, that to me, that was a kind of a micro, you know, aggression on the teacher's part, just not really, you know, fully understanding. So, but I'm gonna shut up. Go ahead, Ingrid.
And thank you, Colby, for your answers. And so we'll close out with Cameron. What is your advice to people of color who are entering this profession?
I think you guys did a great job of touching on all the points that I was going to say, but I also will say use your voice, speak up. That's something that I didn't always understand, like the power of just saying things, just telling somebody, hey, I don't like that you said that, or just letting somebody know, hey, maybe you could change something in this way. And so as I've gotten older and I've gone through school, I really understand how important that is, because people don't know how you're feeling unless you tell them. And so that's the advice that I would give people. Get involved, talk to people, get as much information as you can, be curious, everything like that. And I feel like I also have a similar story. I babysat a girl and she told me that she wanted to be an architect and she didn't really know what that was. And I told her I was in architecture school and she was so excited because she said that she thought she was going to be the only girl in architecture. And the next day she showed me a drawing and she had like done a little floor plan and she had designed a mansion that she said she was going to build one day. And I still think about that because I don't know how many other girls would she have met? How many other people, like how else would she have been exposed to architecture? How many other people would she have seen? And she was very adamant about like being an architect. She still is. And so, yeah, I say just speak up and let people know how you're feeling and get involved.
Thank you, Cameron. And thank our three panelists for being open and sharing of themselves today. And I want to definitely thank everyone who who's here today and has been engaged, especially if you've been with all three sessions. Again, I want to give a disclaimer. All of the information that I've given is foundational. If you are looking for a higher level of implementation and things of that nature, I suggest that you do reach out to a consultant and continue education around this, and definitely look for the application of it. I'm a consultant. If you have any questions for me, you can definitely reach out to me. I will make sure that I give a resource guide to everyone through Ashley, and so she will follow up with that. And again, I just want to thank everyone for being engaged and being open to this experience. And I'll let Linda close us out, or Ashley. Linda or Ashley, sorry.
Yeah, great job, all of you. It was just a great program. I've got a little feedback in here. I think you need to shut your computer off. We've got two computers going, sorry. Can you hear the feedback? Ashley, why don't you do it?
No, we just wanted to thank Ingrid for the past several talks that we've had and starting this discussion among the profession. And thank you to the panelists and opening your hearts to us and letting us listen to your stories. And for everybody that participated on our talks, either the past talks or this one, thank you for joining us. There are multiple ways that we can get involved to start and to continue the conversation. Especially in 2021, we're starting to already plan things for next year, get us out of 2020. And then also, if you noticed, our Jedi Warrior Wednesday, Valerie, was last week's first annual Jedi Warrior. And so if you know of someone that we would like to spotlight, please send us their information, and the Jedi Committee will reach out to them and we will spotlight them as we continue this journey. So we appreciate your time, and don't forget, if you also want to sign up for the Jedi Committee, either at the state level or at local levels, or reaching out to NOMAnash or NOMA Memphis, you can send me their information and I'll get you where you need to go. So If that's it, then that concludes our Jedi Talks for now, and we really appreciate everyone.
Thanks, everybody.